Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kano Reviews, where we review both new and older games. If you like these reviews, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll never miss a review on here. Today we will talk about the survival game The Forest. I have reviewed a few survival games on the channel previously, like Ark, but the truth in the matter is that there's a ton of survival games out there that really offer a drastic different setting or gameplay mechanics. Some of the most famous amongst the survival genre from the olden days are of course Minecraft and DayZ, the mod version. Though there was no particular end goal, the gameplay came in the form of surviving as long as you can on your own or with friends by finding food and water and killing or running away from the random enemies in the world. Later, many more elements were added. Many survival games have implemented RPG mechanics, base building, and the taming of the creatures that inhabit the game world. There was a huge boom a couple of years ago where every other week a new survival game came out that had another setting. There were survival games out in space, there were those underwater, there were survival games in the snow during the age of the dinosaurs, etc., etc. But many, though not all, of these survival games often looked very dated or simple since they were often indie titles. The Forest, however, promised an engaging survival game experience in a beautiful, realistic-looking setting. The story of The Forest is that you and your little son are the survivors of a horrible plane crash that you got stuck on this island. When you wake up from the crash, you see a mysterious figure in red take the boy away, and so your goal is to go after whoever has kidnapped your kid and rescue him. Now this game came out in early access, and in the first few months it was not actually possible to save the child, but nowadays it of course is, and this incentive of finding your son is a real good, though simple, goal. It helps give you motivation to keep playing. As I said, many of the survival games have no end game and simply say, just see how long you can survive and stop playing when you're tired of it. But this game sets a clear goal and a point you work towards, which is great because it feels like you are working towards a climax and can put the game away after properly completing it, instead of letting it go because you simply got bored of it. Now once you are finally in control of your character and get out of the crash part of the airplane, you are finally free to explore the island to your heart's content. Inside the airplane you pick up a fire axe, and it won't take long before you are chopping away at suitcases and bags to loot them for food and drinks to keep your health, hunger, and thirst up. You can then go and explore the place and find a suitable area to set up your base. Up until this point it's still all very standard survival type gameplay, though the graphics are indeed very pretty. The forest feels lush and alive, the beaches are great, and there are some incredibly sinister and creepy areas to find, like an abandoned campsite or a village of locals of the island that hint at some really horrifying things. See, it won't take long before you notice horribly disfigured corpses of other passengers or other people who have arrived at the island before, and I'm very glad that this game does not shy away from the gore, and it earns its 18+ title well in advance, with corpses being tangled up as their intestines, or limbs being poked through other body parts, and more to make horrible looking effigies. And so it turns out that this island is the home to several groups of cannibals, and that's where your main enemy type comes in. Just like with most survival games, they will not be very aggressive on the first or second day, but the longer you survive, the more aggressive they will become, and even new enemy types will appear who are out for blood. And thus it's important to build a proper base that you can defend, or they can keep you safe during the nights when it's very dark and you can easily be ambushed. Now when it comes to base building, there are also many differences between the survival games out there. You have survival games like Minecraft, where you can literally place each block to make it to your liking. You have games like Ark, where you work with foundations, which still give you a lot of freedom to make what you want, but are limited to where they can be placed. And then there's The Forest, where you have set buildings like a house or a hut that you can place somewhere, and then you just have to add all the necessary resources to create it. Now in later updates, they did add the ability to certain shapes so that you could actually make some custom buildings that were designed completely by you, but it does not work perfectly. This also becomes apparent when creating, for example, a wall, which you can custom place throughout the land, and then add new things to it like ramparts or stairs. But you have to be very careful so that things won't clip through one another. It honestly does not work as intuitive as other survival games like Ark, but it does the job well. In comparison to other survival games, there's also not a whole lot you can make, but at least the things you can build have some good functions. It's pretty much that rather than quantity, the forest goes for quality and the essential parts of what you can craft or build. You can make a water skin, a rain catcher, a drying rack, a spear for attacking or fishing, or a bow and an arrow. You can also make decorations that don't really have a function other than to liven things up, or boxes or crates where you can restore resources. A bit of an annoying thing that I have with the game is how few resources you can hold as a character. For many of the buildings, you need a ton of resources, and if, for example, you are making a stone wall, you will need a ton of stone, but your character can only carry like 10 stones at once or something. So the building and gathering of the resources feels a lot more grindy than in some other survival games, because you cannot carry as much on your own. Even with wood, you can carry up to 2 logs on your own, which, if a building requires 45 wood or something, will take forever because you have to go back and forth each time with only 2 logs, and you will still need to chop down trees, which takes a long time too. Now, you can make a log sled, which you can put more logs on, but I think you can only carry 8 or 9 on there. I also thought for a while that the game maybe wanted to go for a more realistic approach of you not being able to carry anything, but the fact that your character can carry 2 tree logs on your shoulder alone throws that argument out of the window, since they clearly have super strength. It honestly discourages the building of custom houses or bases, because it's such a chore to do. But in all honesty, the base building is not that important in the game. In many other survival games, you will build things like an anvil or smithy at your base to make more delicate creations, which automatically means you will spend much more time creating at your base, and thus the base itself becomes much more important. But in the forest, you pretty much only sleep there, cook things on a campfire, and take dried meat and fish off the drying rack to keep you well fed. Now, I'm not saying that the forest would need things like smithies or anvils, because it's very clear that the philosophy of what part the base building plays in the forest is very different than those. So even though the base building itself can be a bit of a chore, the game does offer some fun activities in the form of hunting. You can shoot birds for feathers for arrows, you can kill turtles for their shells to catch rainwater, and you can hunt all sorts of animals like rabbits, deer, and fish for their meat. The spear fishing in particular is very fun, especially if your base is near a small pond where you can head towards and try to catch some tasty snacks. The combat itself is pretty simple but effective. Hitting the enemies with your axe or stabbing them with your spear feels very responsive, with the animations of the enemies reacting really well. Nice details like their teeth flying out when you hit them in the face make the combat even more brutal. Once the enemies are killed, you can even throw them on the fire to collect their bones for armor, chop up their limbs to make effigies to scare them away, or, if you are very morbid, can even eat them and become cannibals yourself. Though as said before that the resource gathering and building is tiresome, the amount of things you can make and how that works actually goes pretty deep. The fact that you can do so much with a dead body alone is an extra mile most other games won't go towards. The cannibals themselves also look and sound really scary. Their shrieks send chills down your spine, and especially in the dark, they like to lurk from afar and then jump you to give you a good jump scare. It's not without reason that this game is also labeled as a horror survival game. If you actually survive long enough, not only the cannibals will attack you, but these grotesque-looking mutants as well, that seem to consist of multiple people or limbs melted together. It's really freaky and grotesque stuff, and I love it. These enemies are also much stronger and can easily destroy your reinforced walls, so the challenge definitely gets ramped up as you are in the game's world longer. But in all honesty, up until this point, I thought that the game was okay, but it wasn't necessarily all that super special aside from the pretty graphics. You can play the game alone or with friends, and the latter is definitely what I recommend because it's a lot of fun to just survive the wilderness together. But where the game actually did start to become really special for me was when I learned about the different caves, the lore, and how deep it actually all went. So there are multiple cave entrances spread out all around the island. Again, with that principle alone, there's nothing new. Many survival games have dungeon-esque environments where you can gather some of the rarest resources, etc. And I thought that was the case here too, where you just go in, you collect some loot, and get out again. but I was very surprised to find that many of these caves go on and give hints about the really interesting lore and backstory. You will find a large group of corpses set up in a position of worship as they seem to be praying to a large structure painted on the wall. Then there are doors you find that do not seem to be made of material that is common to us men. You find notes, photos, evidence, all kinds of things that slowly reveal more about the sinister plot, which is really interesting and well done. Now, the game will never fully tell you exactly what is going on, but there are enough hints and things to discover to make it where you can put things together for yourself on the most important parts. Learning more about this dark background story really motivated me to explore all the caves, and just go through these caves alone is such an amazing and creepy experience. It almost plays like a video game version of the movie The Descent. You will face horrible monsters and creatures here, and since it's so dark, you'll be jump scared more than once. It's also very narrow most of the time, so battles are brutal, hectic, and nail-bitingly tense. But the game proved to go even further, because where I thought that these caves were just simple dungeon-like environments, they sometimes even introduce new gameplay mechanics. In one particular cave, you find scuba gear, and you can use this to swim underwater and reach new areas in the cave you could otherwise not. And another cave has a climbing axe that you can use to ascend and descend walls with and cross over barriers to reach higher places. It felt so amazing to discover all these mysterious caves together with my friends, and because it was so creepy, we all stayed close to one another and kept each other sharp and motivated to put forward the next step. It's honestly an experience I have seldom felt in any other co-op game. There are currently many caves in the game, I think around 10. None of them are randomly generated, which makes it to where they feel like they have a purpose and often provide additional background story, lore, or a unique weapon like the katana. In order to complete the game, you have to do at least 3 of the specific caves, and the others are optional, with the exception of the final cave. By heading out to the cave so much, returning to the base where it actually was safe felt like a well-deserved break, and then it did not matter that much anymore that the building mechanics weren't all that great. By then, we were just focused on having enough water and meat on us and heading out to explore all the caves. The whole tone and purpose of the game had shifted, and I had never imagined that this would happen. The game honestly became so much more enjoyable thanks to that exploration, lore, and cave element. And then, there's also the last 30 to 40 minutes of the game, which are just a huge WTF moment and can, in my opinion, be considered amongst the best ending parts of gaming ever. None of us thought this was the direction that the story went in, and we loved every minute of it, as we had all kinds of new questions and theories. When it comes to the story and delivery, I'm not kidding in that when I say that this survival game has probably the best story of them all. It's really worth experiencing for that alone. And therefore, I can wholeheartedly recommend The Forest. It's not my favorite survival game ever, and I also don't think it's the best. It's mostly because the resource gathering and the base building is limited and quite tedious. Games like Ark offer so much more options with base building, gameplay like exploring, taming, fighting many different enemy types, collecting items for endgame purposes, leveling, etc. The Forest pales a bit in comparison with that when it comes to what is available. But it's not a bad thing, since this game went for a much more realistic and straightforward approach, and that is absolutely fine. The Forest holds its head high amongst the infinite ocean of survival games, and definitely deserves your time and money when you want a nice experience. In the end, The Forest gets an 8.5. The game was also a huge success, and I'm very curious what is next by this creator. As I said, I'm a big fan of this creator's storytelling and story vision, so I cannot wait to delve into whatever dark universe or world they will create next.